Fuori,
Stalin gavcılık davası kaydı.
That's why I'm saying it's altogether informal. And it is our unity and recognition. Kudos from the post. This
Please take your seats. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Andreas Baker. I work for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and we have called this press conference to announce the conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission for the second round of Georgia's 2016 parliamentary elections. We'll proceed in the same way as we did just a few weeks ago, which many of you may have seen. So we'll take statements from the heads of each of the institutions involved in this. Afterwards, there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions. There's simultaneous interpretation into Georgian if there's need for that. Our conclusions will be available in written form at the end of the press conference outside of this room, and will also be available on our websites. So without any more time, I will ask Mr. Ignacio Sanchez-Amor, who is the Special Coordinator and Leader of the Short-Term OSCE Observation Mission, to take the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this press conference. It has been stated over that Georgia 216 parliamentary elections enable candidates to campaign freely and voters to make an informed choice about their options. Our main conclusions, besides by confirming these improvements we noticed in our first report, are that the runoffs were competitive and administered in a manner that respected the rights of candidates and voters, despite the lack of a legal framework for the second round. In the period between the rounds, contestation of the first round results dominated political discourse that is quite normal having a second round. We found that the principle of transparency and the right to effective progress were often not respected in the investigation and adjudications of election disputes by elections commissions and courts. In the short and current campaign, media coverage was more balanced than for the first round. Election day procedures were conducted conducted in a smooth and professional manner and assessed positively by observers, as Election Commission were better prepared and adherence to procedures improved. Formal version of the second round voting is lacking in the law, and attention must be paid to legal investigation and complaint procedure, but I'm very pleased to see that election day was smooth and professionally done. As mentioned, the election code does not provide specific regulations on how second round elections should be conducted, and of course it is not possible to simply take all time frames and procedures of an election that usually takes months and apply it into 2 weeks. Aiming to address a few procedural gaps, the Center of the Commission issued decrees which were adopted late in the process and at times contradicted elements of the election code. Still, in the limited time left when election operations resumed, things were well managed and therefore were generally respected. Overall, things were much more quiet than prior to the 8th October elections, but a few reported physical altercations are being investigated by law enforcement. As well as we encourage all stakeholders to use official legal channels to address any concerns or complaints they have. These are the big conclusions, but as a condition, I would like to make an additional comment. Obviously, a great deal of the political discussion in recent weeks has related to the possibility of one-party having a constitutional majority in the Parliament. There is, of course, nothing wrong with this if it is the will of the people. Then it should, of course, be respected and implemented. If it turns out that one party has such a majority, for the moment I didn't see the final result, then this authority comes with great responsibility. It is important that this is used in a way that lives up to Georgia's aspiration for greater integration into European structures. By following the principles such as appropriate check and balances and respect for minority opinions must remain at the center of any discussion on constitutional changes. It's not just governing towards the European Union, it's governing up to European standards. Today also have noted that we place great emphasis on healthy competition between political forces. This is very much society, and it has clearly existed in this place. For those parties that did not reach the results that they would have wanted, I have a personal call to the not feel discouraged. Please remain engaged and continue to move forward your ideas. Pluralism is crucial, and Georgia needs to continue political debate if it is to achieve its aspiration. Thank you for your time. I will now ask my colleagues to also add their comments.
Thank you. I will now ask Ms. Ana Gomez, the head of the delegation employed by the European Parliament.
We are very pleased to be back in Georgia, and the European Parliament delegation this time was composed of 6 members representing the 4 largest political groups. We subscribe fully to the preliminary statement that has just been made by our OSCE Special Coordinator, Mrs. Sanchez-Amor. We would like to express our thanks to Ambassador Kalchevsky and his team for the continued support, and of course to all the colleagues from other parliamentary assemblies for our fruitful collaboration. On the second group, we have the following observations, adding to the comments and concerns we already expressed on the first round. On consideration of the numerous complaints and appeals received by the district electoral committees, we were disturbed by the fact that in the absence of a legal framework to regulate the second round of elections, the handling of complaints, some leading to the annulment of results at district level, had to be based on interpretative decrees by the CC, and that opened the way to inconsistencies in the rulings, thus potentially diminishing stakeholders' confidence in the electoral administration. We were also worried on the information we received on a high number of alleged cases of pressure and reprisals on voters, including threats of job dismissals and social benefit cuts as a result of their support for opposition candidates. We understand that most of these allegations could not be substantiated, nor were reported for investigation. But we cannot exclude that fear would prevent victims to come forward with formal complaints. We leave this to public concern. We leave this public concern to the attention of the relevant authorities, trusting that they will ensure that these threats will not materialize. When it comes to election day, we observed a very professional conduct of electoral procedures inside precinct election commissions, with again a very high number of women performing with a high level of competence and dedication. We praise that again, and we really hope that this will be reflected at all levels of political life. Inside the polling stations that we observed, all went smoothly, partially due to less pressure felt by the now experienced polling staff and by the lower turnout of voters. But there was overcrowding of the precincts, in most cases with a high number of accredited domestic observers and media representatives that were present in rooms that were too small. And we are concerned that in a number of cases, some of these people went behind the role of observers, interfering with the work of the PCs and interacting with voters inappropriately. This could suggest that they were not genuine observers, rather surrogates of political parties or candidates. Of course, we want to stress observation by political parties, civil society, media cannot be underestimated, and no steps should be taken to restrict genuine observation. But we believe that clear criteria are needed to govern the accreditation of observers, and also that regulation on the numbers of observers and media allowed to stand at each polling station is necessary. In Tbilisi, we found a quiet environment outside polling stations. Yet, the picture was different in several places in rural areas, especially when the competing candidates were involved in close races. For instance, in Mishrita, Bukhrani, Ahal Sirhe, we met groups of men standing outside the precincts, often creating a tense atmosphere, suggesting possible intimidation of voters or confrontation among candidate supporters. In some cases, locals identified these bystanders with sports and martial arts groups linked to the ruling party. Sometimes police was present, but seemed unable or unwilling to disperse the bystanders. Overall, we continue to believe that there were conditions for the people of Georgia to genuinely express their will in these elections, despite the irregularities and incidents noted. Finally, let me note that we, in the European Parliament, will continue to observe closely developments in Georgia behind the elections, since we believe that democracy requires genuine elections, but also much more in between elections, including respect for basic freedoms such as media freedom and respect for the role of the opposition. We know that the stakes in this second round were very high, considering the impact on the balance of power and with the ruling party aiming at obtaining a constitutional majority. Early electoral results seem to confirm this. Therefore, we believe particular responsibility lies with the majority. It needs to use this power to benefit the country rather for political retribution. In these circumstances, ensuring respect for institutional checks and balances between the different branches of power and the democratic roles of the majority and the opposition is, in our view, of paramount importance. And it should not be forgotten, of course, that in every democracy, the government of today could be the opposition of tomorrow, and the opposition of today could be the government of tomorrow. Georgia and its European path remain very high on the agenda of the European Union and of the European Parliament. We look forward to the implementation of the final statement, the recommendations that will be in the final statement that will be delivered by the OSCE ODIHR in the next few weeks. We encourage this full implementation. We'll try to support this process, and we hope as well that the questions that have been earlier raised will indeed be addressed, like investigation for violent incidents that occurred during the electoral campaign, imbalances in political parties' financing, media plurality and freedom, and of course the independence of the judiciary. We stay with Georgia and the democratic path that is there. Okay.
Thank you. I will now ask Mr. Emanuel Zingueres, who headed the delegation deployed by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe.
Yes, subscribing to everything that was said just now, we have our common meetings, our colleagues here presented in the front of your TV cameras, and we just read our statement here next in the front of you. Let's have some additional remarks. Georgia is an old member of Council of Europe, and qualities of democracy in Georgia are in our focus. So coming back to the issue about current elections, so the only remarks about current elections of 2 rounds were stated in our first statement, October date, and today's statement. And from Council of Europe side, our statement will be summarized on the 25th of November in Cyprus. Coming back to the observations, what I can add, from my point of view, the withdrawal of some candidates between the first and second rounds is a serious issue, and the motivations of the withdrawals should be carefully analyzed. The investigation of the irregularities in the first round must be completed. It goes without saying that allegations coming from all sides, all interested groups on irregularities during the second round must be carefully evaluated as well. Coming back to the issue related of pluralism of opinion, in the future pluralism of opinion in Georgia, I would like to say that the judicial system in the country, in my opinion, is not reacting properly to allegations done by many participants of the elections. There was a substantial imbalance in the amount of funds that parties were able to raise during the campaign, leading to unequal opportunities. If the election circumstances are more or less creating an environment for competitiveness, the situation with democracy in general, from my point of view, the separation of powers and future system of checks and balances, which I mentioned by my colleagues in the country, should be overwatched carefully. So future steps of Georgia towards the European Union is in direct link with the shape of democracy and the opposition rights in the country. Having the absolute majority in Parliament, the local elites will now be responsible for the fate of Georgian democracy and their place in European democratic family. The family of democratic nations to keep an eye on the international development and the opposition's rights to express their opinions and the fate of personalities in opposition in Georgia. So, let's say that maturity of democracy is linked but not always linked only to observation of elections and better of environment for elections. Thank you.
Most important,
of course, was remarks from our side related to our worries about check and balances in the country after the election. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll call on Ambassador Alexander Kalchevsky, who headed the long-term observation mission deployed by the OSCE ODIHR.
good afternoon. Thank you for attending this press conference. So yesterday, all of us together, we had over 150 observers who visited 583 polling stations in all constituencies where second rounds took place. They also observed the counting and tabulation of results in the district election commissions. And on the basis of the reports, we have a very good picture of how the second round election day proceedings were organized. And I would like to say at this stage that we have noted improvements in the process. But it is important to stress that an election is about more than one day. Indeed, an election observation is about the full range of issues involved in an election process. This is why our mission has been here for more than 2 months, and will follow the remainder of the process before releasing its final report in about 2 months. Indeed, as you remember, our mission started its work on 30th of August. Then following the 8th October election day, we observed the conclusion of the tabulation process, the adjudication of complaints by the election commissions and courts, the campaign itself, the repeat elections that followed, and preparations for the second round, for which our core team of 14 international experts based here in Tbilisi has been joined by 14 long-term observers deployed around the country. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to stress 3 important points in my view. Stress that our role is to observe and provide factual reporting on our findings. It means it's not to interfere in the process. Secondly, our mandate is to assess the elections, as in all other OEC participating states, to assess the elections for the compliance with OEC commitments or international obligations and standards, as well as with national legislation. And finally, additionally, our work is founded on the principles of impartiality, professionalism, transparency, and objectivity. These guide our activities at all times. Our observations following the first round showed that confidence in the election commission had somehow decreased as a result of alleged irregularities and procedural issues, inconsistencies in how results were corrected, and the handling of complaints. Our observers noted weaknesses in the adjudication of complaints by commissions and courts, in particular the lack of proper notification and thorough investigation of claims. For the second round, we consider that, it has already been said here, we consider that in order to guarantee that elector contestants and voters are able to fully exercise their rights to participate, the electoral process should be fully regulated. Whereas here the election code doesn't provide sufficient regulation for the second round. But still, despite this, the elections were adequately administered in a manner that, in our view, respected the rights of candidates and voters. As far as the campaign is concerned in the medias, we noticed the campaign was short and subdued, but our media monitoring of campaign coverage showed that broadcasters were more balanced than during the first round. The Central Election Commission took steps to prepare polling station staff for the second round, and yesterday we did see, as I said, we did see improvements in the process, in particular the adherence to procedures. And as I said before, the election observation mission deployed by the OSCE will continue to follow the conclusion of the election process and the adjudication of any complaints and appeals. So these are just some of the conclusions that I wanted to highlight today. There are a lot of details in our joint statement of preliminary findings and conclusions, so please read it. I would like to stress how important it is that the international observers, and you can see how many are here on the podium, speak with one voice, to the extent that sometimes we repeat it ourselves, but this is not by coincidence. Now, ladies and gentlemen, going further, I would like to stress, to emphasize that, well, indeed, an election observation is not an end in itself. In this respect, we'll be, as you know, we'll be issuing a final report some 2 months following the elections. In this report, we'll be providing concrete recommendations for how the process could be improved. Georgia, as an OSCE participating state, has committed to following up on recommendations from election observation missions, and we, as an organization, we stand ready to assist in this process. Further steps should and can be made to address remaining challenges, both in the laws and practice. Finally, I would like to say that while, in my opinion, the political establishment in Georgia has not fully matured, the current acceptance of the results from the first round by the Georgian people and the maintenance of peace in the second campaign period is something the citizens of this country can be proud of and commended for. So I'm very happy to conclude on this positive note, and thanking you for your attention. I would like to express my best wishes to Georgia and its people, to Georgia every day increasing and getting forth civil society. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We now have some time for questions. It's a little bit limited, but we'll take what we can. Please state your, yes, I see you already got the microphone. Please state your name and media source.
Thank you. So very happy to request the first few questions. After assessment of the first round, we are written in the declaration that it was well and used in the elections. We didn't see any such an assessment as fully correct. How could you explain that? And the second round, where were improvements in mentioning it? What kind of improvements were the violations you have observed were worse than you compare with the first round?
I think there are differences, because the problem, I think the core of the problem is not having a legal framework, a clear legal framework about the second round that drives to certain procedural problems. That is, I think most of our statements underline that procedural problem because not having a legal framework. But we don't, if you go, there are improvements, but there are problems because this situation of not having a legal framework. But we note the improvements from election to election. Not, of course, the election of October compared to the 2012, and now the second round with, for example, as has been underlined by Ambassador Kuczewski, no violence, and the acceptance of the results of the first round. I think this is a clear improvement of the political language that tries to, we hope, to a better understanding between the political, main political stakeholders in the next parliament. Please.
Could I add from the European Parliament that we never
use that expression free and fair. We actually try to observe elections and identify whether they were the genuine expression of the will of the voters. And I think we can say that the way the voters form their decision is another matter. And on that we have been very specific on problems we identified, and that we hope that will be corrected in the future. But it has a lot to do as well with the maturity of the system, the maturity of the electors themselves.
Can we, okay. It would be nice to hear your opinion as well, and I have the next question afterwards.
About the elections. So you are witnessing a few things here. Environment for elections. In my statement, I was trying to separate maturity of democracy at all and the elections. We're talking now about the normal field of elections. First election, October the 10th, and the second election, October the 31. But the third elections, all possible rumors related to just Ambassador Kolchevsky ended his speech saying thank you for the people who kept quiet, mature level of elections and the circumstances. But in the case where cases were all possible related to the rumors in the country that revolution is coming and revolution is not came, and now on the consciousness of those people who spread all those lies against Georgia are now to tell why they were spreading such rumors before the first round of elections. So we are not going deeper to all details. We have a lot of details here during the elections. But if we will ask specific question, we will go to the details. Thank you.
So maybe one more question, to give other people an opportunity.
After the second term, majority, constitutional majorities in the hands of Georgians. You mentioned ECC and maybe there for the problem of checks and balances. How could you assess them in one word or in a few sentences? Is it a step forward or not?
Well, it is the constitutional majority. You informed me. I didn't know at that time that it was. I warned you before talking about the issue that in my case, and I think in the case of my colleagues, is an additional comment. Beside the electoral observation, and after the conclusions, I would like to add an additional comment because. As you remember probably in the first press conference, I let the phrase, democracy is what happens between elections. It's not just the polling stations, the other things. I think it's useful for the maturity for helping the maturity of your democracy, for having some kind of expression of the responsibility of the political force having so strong majority. And it's for that, I add in my comments, it's not just to govern the country towards the European Union, it's to govern the country up to the European standards. And this is a key question. It's not just to have an direction, but the way of you are acting in political, it has to be the same way that usually is in our countries. And this is an additional comment because of that, but it's not, and I would like to underline that, it's not part of our assessment of elections. It's just a political comment on the current situation after the election, and of course it's not part of our written report.
Thank you. Madam Gomez.
Yes, I concur fully with what my colleague Sanchez Damara said, that indeed it's about indeed whether the country will be living up to European standards, what will be done out of that constitutional majority. A major responsibility lies with the majority by definition, as I highlighted in our statement. Opposition also has tremendous responsibilities, especially, of course, the main opposition party in the framework that has been created as a result of these elections. But it all depends on what will be done with that constitutional majority. And for instance, if that will be used, I can be specific, to actually introduce gender inequality in some kind of laws relating to the personal status of citizens, for instance, regarding marriage. we are seeing that happening in some European countries, and that is being taken to European courts because we believe this is not in line with European standards. If it's about, for instance, changing the balance of power in terms of the checks and balance that result, for instance, from the need to strengthen the judiciary, instead of strengthening its independence, actually thwarting it, obviously it would be not up to European standards. The same thing, for instance, I would say, I come from Portugal, where we have universal elections for the President of the Republic, and I can tell you that in my country, it would be read as a very, as a step backwards if that right of universal election of the President would be withdrawn. Because of course this is also what entitles the President to, and actually gives the legitimacy of the President to exercise his role in a system where constitutionally these checks and balances are established. I can imagine that probably in other European countries where the head of state is not even elected, that could be different. But these are, of course, this shows that it depends as well on where you are coming from. If you are coming from a situation where, for instance, the President is democratically elected by universal rule, anything detrimental to that would be detrimental in the eyes of the people eventually. So it has to be seen on the concrete proposals that will come out of the majority on how to translate that constitutional majority in benefit for the whole country and for the strengthening of the democratic system, and not, of course, in weakening it. Thank you.
Yes, the huge question of maturity of democracy and now the question related to today's subject, elections, are very different questions, extremely different questions. So we just concentrated, and you can see, you have in your hands, and you have in your hands our statement. That is a statement about the elections, the 10th and the 31st of dates. Coming back to the essence of your questions about democracy in this country, I can show only my opinion. Did support democracy the surveillance of personalities, journalists or politicians and putting to YouTube? No. Did the justice system will not respond to allegations are supportive to the democracy? No. So I have possible 20 more points here. We can go on about other errors. This question related to the issue that international community of democratic states will keep an eye on after such a majority, constitutional majority was yesterday during the elections approved, what they will do, looking at the facts that in the past was some I try to carefully to use the wording, question marks about some issues related to the system of justice in Georgia and relations between the powers in Georgia, between executive power, system of justice, intelligence, and how they will be used, let's hope not misused. So for this reason, I would like to repeat that if it was stated about the step forward, and this was all of us was correct, about the elections in Georgia, about the democracy in Georgia, was absolutely separated from the question touched today. I cannot say about steps forward, and it's a separate questions, and we need to discuss that in Monetary Committee of Council of Europe. That is the absolutely other question, and I'm also subscribing about huge progress in this field. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have limited time, but any more questions? I see none. We've obviously been very clear. In that case, thank you for your time. As mentioned, the statement of preliminary conclusions, as well as an accompanying press release, is available outside as well as on our websites. Thank you very much.
Para.